Hey everyone, I'm Aria. Welcome back to the channel and to 2021. I hope you're all doing well and excited to move into a new year of simulations. Thank you to everyone who supported me in 2020. If you enjoy my work, make sure to like and subscribe, and also if you want to get a copy of this blend file, you can head over to my Patreon page and sign up to become a member, and then you can get this file as well as many of the other simulations that you've seen on the channel. Okay, here we go. So as usual, we're just going to select everything by hitting A and hit delete to clear our scene. Then we're just going to start by creating our first gear. So Shift A, Mesh, and we're going to click Cylinder. Then we just want to rotate this on the X, so R, X, and we'll type in 90. Then we can just scale this a bit, so hit S and type in 0.75. Since we're going to smooth this out, we do need to add a little bit more geometry, so hit Tab to go into Edit mode or click up here. Then hold Control, hit R, and click. You can see that we've got this guide now, but if we hit Escape, it will sit evenly between the two other edges, and then we can open this up, and we want to set this to something like 4 or 5. If you're using a cylinder as well, you want to make sure that you add geometry to the end here, so hold Alt, and click this to select this loop. Next, you're going to hit I, and we can just drag our mouse in, click, and we'll do that again. I, click, and one more time. Just do it to this side as well, so let's select that, I, click, and one more time. Great, so now we can hit Tab to go back into object mode, right click, shade smooth, and then just head over to the right here to the modifiers, click here, and subdivision surface. So the next thing that we need to do is add in our gear. So if I hit Shift A and go to Mesh, you can see that I've got a lot of these extra options here, which you may not have. So what you can do if you don't have those is go to Edit, Preferences, then we're just going to go to Add-ons. Make sure that you've selected all. Then if you type in the word extra, you'll see that we've got this Add Curve Extra Objects and Add Mesh Extra Objects. I've got both of these set to on because I also like the options with the curve, but in this case we're just going to add mesh extra objects, so just make sure that this has a check mark beside it. Now if you hit Shift A, Mesh, you'll see that you've got all these extra options, and we can go all the way down near the bottom and select Gear. It brings up a side menu here, and I usually say not to click away, but in this case, if you do accidentally click away, the nice thing about this add-on is if you click the gear, right click, you can go to change gear, and it will bring most of your settings back. So just keep that in mind, but in this case, we don't need to make any changes right now for this gear, so we're just going to click away. Select the gear, and we want to rotate this the same as the cylinder, so R, X, and we'll type in 90. You can see that it basically fits around it, but it is a little bit tight, so let's select our cylinder. I'm just going to hit 1 on my numpad just to go into front orthographic. Hit S to scale, and then we can just drag this in a little bit. You can also hold Shift just to lessen the increments. Then just make sure that you leave a slight gap between these two objects, just because we are going to be adding these to the rigid body system. Great, so now that we've got that, we can head over to the physics properties. And for our cylinder, we're going to click Rigid Body, set this to Passive, and click Animated, since we're going to be animating this object to spin. Also, very important, we want to change the collision shape from Convex Hull to Mesh. Since we are using a cylinder, you could also select Cylinder as the type if you've got a slower system, but the most accurate is to select Mesh, so I'm going to leave it at that for now. Next, we can select the gear. Add rigid body again, we can leave this to active. And for the gear, we definitely need to make sure that we set this to mesh, just because it needs to take into consideration all the grooves. If we just click here and go back to frame 1 and hit play, you'll see that we got an issue right away where these are not working like they should. So what we want to do is to get this to sort of stay on top of our cylinder. So the first thing we can try is head over to sensitivity in the rigid body settings, and we can just type in 0, which will just basically give us no margin. Then click the cylinder and do the same thing as well. Now if we hit play, you can see that it is looking a little bit better. If you've still got your gear flying all over the place, what you can do is select your cylinder and you can just scale this. Now if you hit play, you'll see that it doesn't really work at all. It kind of just drops and hangs on it. But that's okay because the next step we do is going to take care of that. So I'm just going to hit 1 on my numpad just to go into front orthographic and just scale this up again. Like I said, if you are having issues, you can leave this to a smaller scale and the next step is going to lock everything in place. So now that we've got a minimum of 2 objects in our rigid body, we can connect these together. So I'm going to click on the gear. Then hold shift and select our cylinder as well. Head up to object, rigid body, and we're going to click connect. When we did that, it added a constraint and you can see it up here as well. If I just throw on the toggle here, you can see that it's basically just centered on our cylinder. If we just hop over to the physics properties, you can see that the type is set to fixed, which we're going to leave it at that for now. But there's also a bunch of other options and there's some great tutorials going over all of these, so I suggest you check them out. Now if I hit play, you can see that absolutely nothing happens, which is okay because eventually we're going to animate this cylinder here, which will spin our gear. Now that we've got our first gear, I'm just going to select everything, so click and drag until you've got everything selected. It doesn't matter in which order. Next, hold shift, hit D. Then hit X and we can just drag a little bit over. G again to move and we'll hit Z to lock to the Z axis and we're just going to bring this up to about this point. And this is the most tricky part, is just getting these teeth aligned, so we're just going to do a little bit of tweaking here. So I'm going to hit R to rotate and Y to lock to the Y. Then if I just drag this up, you can see now that I've kind of got our teeth interlocking. But it is looking a little bit far away, so I'm going to hit G and X again just to bring this a little bit over. I've found trying to line up this edge with this edge here, the 2 points, if you go in too far, you probably will have some issues. So again, just try to line up these points best as possible, and you should have no issues. If we hit play, nothing's going to happen yet, so what we need to do is turn one of these on. There are ways to turn this into a motor, which you can then use velocity to calculate the speed of this. But I found for this simulation, since I was looking for a very specific rotation, I just decided to add keyframes instead. Click on the cylinder, hit N on your keyboard just to bring up your transform settings under the item tab. Since we've got our cylinder facing along the y-axis, that's the axis we're going to use for rotation. So right click and you can insert a single keyframe. Then let's click here to go all the way to the end of our animation. In my animation, mine was quite a bit longer. It was 1440 frames. And the reason why I did that is because then it turned every frame into 1 second, since we're rendering out in 24 frames per second. So in this case, I'm just going to set this to 250. Right click and insert a single keyframe. Then if I just quickly head back to frame 1 and hit play, there's just a couple things we need to fix. So let's head back to frame 1. And first, let's just select our constraint, and I'm just going to go up to the transform settings here, click, and I'm going to set this back to 0 just so that it is facing 90 degrees. Then if I just head over to the physics properties, you can see that we still got this set to fix. I want to change this to hinge, and basically hinge will just allow this to sort of rotate on the Z. So if I hit play, you can see that it's still going to have an issue. And the reason why that is you can see that the Z axis of our constraint is facing up, which means that the gear wants to rotate sort of around this object here, so we need to fix that. Make sure that you've got that constraint selected. We're going to hit R, X, and type in 90. Then you'll see that our Z axis is now facing perpendicular to the way we want it to rotate. Now if I head back to frame 1 one more time and hit play, you can see that it's looking really nice. So if you still got issues, just make sure to head back to frame 1. You can click this a couple times. And in Blender, sometimes it doesn't want to calculate. So if it's still having issues, if it's not nice and smooth, head over to the scene property. And a good way to reset Blender is I just like to unselect gravity, hit play, select it, and just head back to frame 1. Now if I hit play one more time, you should see that it is working correctly. If you still have issues, it could be that your gears are too close together. So just make sure that these 2 points are closely matched. And everything should be working great. So now that we've done our second gear, what we can do is just select all 3 of these. And now we're going to create the larger gear that goes perpendicular. So hold Shift, D, then Z, and we can just bring this up. So we're going to rotate on the X, so R, X. And you can either type in -90 or 90. It doesn't really matter. Then let's just bring it out of the way by hitting G and Y and bringing this over. We want to make this gear a bit larger, so back to what I showed you before, what we can do is select our gear, right-click, select Change Gear, and since I'm going to make this about 4 times the size, click the radius and we're going to type in 4, so it's about 4 times the size, and you'll see that it kind of changes the size of our teeth. So the simplest way to do that is just to multiply our number of teeth by 4 as well. Type in 12 times 4 or just type in 48, whatever works for you. And that should fit great. So now we just need to move these together. So I'm going to hit 7 on the numpad to go into the top orthographic. Click and drag just so I've got all 3 of these objects selected. Then we can just hit G, Y, and just bring this a little bit closer. Again, you want these points to sort of match the edges here, so just keep that in mind when you're moving this closer. Then, of course, you can see that it's a little bit off, so we're going to hit R to rotate, Z, hold Shift, and we'll just drag the mouse down just till this moves over, and click. Then if I zoom out, you can see that these are way too low, so we're going to hit G, Z, hold Shift again, and we'll just bring this up until these points are roughly matching. Then one more time, R, Z, and we can just move this a little bit more into place. Awesome, so now if we zoom out and hit play, you should see all 3 gears moving and working very nicely together. Again, like I said, if you're having issues with these sort of jumping up and down, it probably means that this is either too low or it's too far in. I always like to save my project, as you know, just so that we're not losing anything along the way. So I'm going to click and drag to select all of these objects again, hold Shift, hit D, and right away you'll see something very weird happens, and the reason why that is because we're not on frame 1, we're on 158, so if I click to frame 1, you can see now that it snapped into proper place. So just make sure that you don't click away, hit G, X, and we can just bring this over. Then rotate this R, Y, 90, or -90. Then G and Z, and we'll just bring this up close. Hit 7 on your numpad to go into top orthographic. It's a little bit hard to see, so if you hit 9 immediately after hitting 7, it'll basically go the opposite, so we'll be underneath. We can see that we need to move it along our X-axis, so G, X, and we'll just bring this out. If we just spin around here, you can see our gears are matching, so we need to rotate this on the X-axis, so R, X, and we can just bring this over. Hold Shift to make it a little bit easier. Click and you can see that the last thing we need to do is just bring this up. So G, Z, and we'll just bring this up. Another thing that we can do is just select our original cylinder that is driving our animation. It starts a little bit slow, so it may do a lot better if it starts at 1 constant speed. Normally I tell you to click here and go into the graph editor just to show you. But another quick way to do that, as a few people have pointed out, is if you just select the animated object, you can head down to the timeline, hit T, and set your keyframe interpolation to linear. If you do need a bit more of a visual, just head into the graph editor, normalize, and you can see now that we've got a linear progression. Awesome, so that's looking a lot better. So that's it for our rigid body system. So you could bake it at this point if you just head over to the scene properties, open up the rigid body world, and then hit bake. It's a super fast bake, so don't worry. If you do need to make any changes, you can just delete it and try again. But if I scrub through, you can see that we've got a nice steady here. As well, keep in mind that when you do bake simulations in Blender, they tend to run a little bit smoother. So sometimes that could be the issue. Just make sure that you bake your simulation. And then for our last gear, I didn't add this to the rigid body, so I'm just going to make a couple changes here. So just select this cylinder, scale and Z just to make this a little bit smaller. Then for mine, I also had a circle in the middle, so Shift A, mesh, and circle. Bring this up. I like to do an overhead view just so I can see where I am. G, Shift Z, and we'll just bring this over. Then hit S to scale. GZ, and we'll just bring this down. Tab to go into edit mode, hit F to fill. Then while you've got the vertices selected, hit I, and we'll just add some more geometry to the middle. And that's it. So tab to go back into edit mode, Then in my animation, I also had one giant gear as well, but I didn't connect that to the rigid body system. I just made an animation for it. So let's click this. Shift D, Z, so we can just bring this up. G and X just to bring this over. Then one more time, we'll click the gear, right click, change gear. We're going to double this again, so 96, and set the radius to 8. Click the circle in the middle, scale, and type in 2. Since we're not adding this into the rigid body system, we can just select, head over to the physics, and we're just going to delete the rigid body. Click the center as well, and we'll do the same thing. Finally, you'll see that we have a constraint, so we can just click that and hit delete. We do want to animate this, so I'm going to hold shift and select 1, 2, and then the center. Hold control, hit P, and parent. I'm just going to bring this back a little bit as well, to about there. Then for the animation, just click the center, set the rotation to 0, and add a single keyframe. Click here to go to the last frame, and type in 10. Then insert another keyframe. Let's just hover over the timeline, hit T, and select linear. Save, and then if we hit play, you can see that we've got our gears working correctly. And that's it for our rigid body. I'm just going to hide this cylinder since we don't need it, so click on that. In the collections, head up to the restriction toggles and let's add both of these. Then we can turn this off for both of those. By the way, you'll notice that my gears were smooth, so you can either do that before or after you bake the rigid body. It doesn't really matter, so just right click and we're going to shade smooth. Head over to the modifiers. Click and add a subdivision surface of 2. Then we'll just do that for all of our gears. Just for lighting purposes, I didn't smooth this last one, but I did add a subdivision surface. And just left it to have a little bit more interaction with the light. Next, let's add our 2021 text, but instead of adding it to the center here and moving it, we can just click this, right click. Then if you go all the way down to snap, you can choose the option cursor to selected, and you'll see that our cursor now is in the center. So anytime we add an object, it'll go right in the center here. So Shift A, text, then RX and 90, RZ 90. Then we just need to scale this up and bring it over. Hit tab to go into edit mode, and then you can just backspace and type in 2021. That should work great. I just brought mine out a little bit as well, just so that it didn't interact with our clock hand. As well, we just want to give this some depth, so head over to the text properties, open up geometry, then we're just going to set the depth of the bevel to 0.03. We're done with this now, so we can right click and convert to mesh. Then hold Ctrl A to reset all of our transforms and set origin to geometry. Shift A again, mesh, and we're going to click cylinder. Just bring this up and we'll use this to create our second hand. So type in S to scale and you can hold Shift Z just to lock it to the X and Y. Then S and Z just to scale on the Z until you're roughly happy. And again, since we are using a cylinder, we do want to add some more geometry. So tab to go into edit mode, Control R, click. Then just make sure that you set this to something like 8 to 10. We also want to add some geometry to the bottom face, so Alt-click to select this edge loop, I, and just drag your mouse in a couple of times. Let's do the same to the top, so I'm just going to quickly throw on the X-ray toggle. Back to object mode, shade smooth, and then we can add a subdivision surface as well. And that's pretty much it for our geometries. For the ground, I just simply added a mesh plane and I brought this down, scaled this up quite a bit. Again, this is just an extra piece, you don't have to do this, but I added a wireframe modifier. Make sure to go into edit mode and add some subdivisions as well. And reset all of the transforms. Super simple. Again, you can name all of these things just so you're not getting confused. There's a lot of objects in this scene, so just keep that in mind. I also like to put my constraints into their own collection as well, so I'm just going to select all these and drop them in. Then remember to select your original collection, otherwise you're going to add stuff into this. Now that we've got all of our geometry, let's start adding our lighting and materials. So let's head over to the world properties, and instead of having a gray background, we'll add an environment texture. So click here, then open If you want to use the HDRI that I'm using, I'll throw the link in the description. And click open. For this tutorial, we're just using basic HDRI lighting, so we'll just leave that. Now if I turn on the render preview, you can see that we've got some very basic lighting. The next thing we can do to get that volumetric lighting is add a cube, so Shift A, Mesh, and Cube. Then we just want to center this and scale it up enough so that it's surrounding our scene. You can always change this later if it's not large enough for you. Since we're going to start adding some nodes, let's head over to the shading tab, so click here. Then just so that we can see through this, let's just head over to the object properties. Click on viewport display and let's set this to wireframe. And now we can add a new material by clicking new. Then we want to delete our default shader, Shift A, and search for volume. Make sure to select principled volume. Make sure you connect it to the volume and not the surface. Then I'm going to change this to blue. This does matter for our lighting because this will affect the way our lights look. So if you want to get the same look as me, just make sure to roughly put in these values here. Finally, we can change our density to 0.075. Now if we turn on a render preview, you can see that we've just sort of got this dark fog. I'm just going to head back to the layout tab just so that it's easier for you to see, but you can also do this in the shading tab as well. This is looking a little bit bland, so to fix that up, we're going to add some light. So Shift A, light, and we're going to add a point light. Now I'm just going to bring this back. You can put this wherever you want, but I had mine at about this position. Then head over to the light properties, change this to blue. Then we'll set the power to 7500 and change the radius to 1. Now we can duplicate this, so Shift D and Y, and we'll just bring this a little bit over. Click here and let's set this to a nice orangey red color. And since we're getting some nice lighting now, let's just jump over to materials. So back to the shading tab. Click on the first gear and we're going to click new. Base color. Then we just want to set this to like a navy blue. Bring the metallic all the way up and the roughness all the way down. Again, you can pick whatever color you want. These are just the colors that I used for mine. I'm just going to make that a little bit darker. Now that I've got that material, I'm just going to set that to most of the other pieces here. So I'm just going to name this gears, which you don't have to do. This is just so I remember which it is. You can also leave it to the default. Let's click our other objects and we're going to set that to gears as well. I'm also going to set this to the cylinders. I did use a different material, but it was barely noticeable, so I'm just going to use this same one. Then for these centerpieces, I did do a little bit different of material, so new. Let's make this very dark, metallic up to 1 and roughness to 0. Then select this and we're going to add that same material to this one as well. And that's it. We can also add it to our ground, so select here and material 1. Then moving right along, let's click our second hand, click new, delete the principled BSDF, Shift A, and search for emission. Hook this up to the surface, then we'll just set this to blue and type in 500. We're not getting much effect from that, so what we can do is just quickly jump over to our render settings. And the main thing here is if we turn on bloom, you'll see that that starts to show up really nicely now. Feel free to change this to your liking, but for now I'm just going to set this to 0.1. I'm also going to turn on screen space reflections as well. And you'll see that things are starting to come together, so turn off our guides. You can see that things are looking really nicely. And next we want to add our atmosphere particles, so Shift A, Mesh, and Cube. Then we just want to scale this up till it's about the same size as our volume. Doesn't have to be perfect, just close. If you want to see it a little bit better, just head over to the object properties again, viewport display, and we can change this to wire. Now we can add our particles, so head over to the right and we're going to click particles. Click the plus to add a new system. Then again, this is more personal preference than anything, but if you want to get the look that I got, just follow these settings. So 2200, make sure that both your start and end frame are set to 1, and then your lifetime is set to the length of the animation. If we were to zoom in, you can see that our particles are only around the edge, so instead of having it on the faces, click source and we can switch this from faces to volume. Then instead of having jittered, let's select random. And that should be good. Like I said, it's just very random, so it doesn't really matter exactly how they're positioned. Scroll down a little bit and we're going to turn off our velocity. Then we want to add rotation, and this is what's going to give us that nice glinting effect because our particles are rotating and catching the light, so just add some random value. If we scroll down a little bit further, we do want to add some motion, so I'm going to add some brownian motion. And just to show you, if I hit play, you can see that they're already falling, so I'm just going to quickly go down and turn off the gravity. Then if I hit play again, you can see that our particles sort of just fly away, which is not what we want, so head back to frame 1. And we want to get them to be really jittery, but to stay in place. So the way we do that is just scroll back up, and along with our brownian motion, we want to add some damping. And in this case, we'll set this all the way to 1. Save, and then if we hit play, you can see that we've got these really jittery particles that sort of stay in place. Change this from halo to object. Then of course we need to create a particle object, so Shift A, Mesh, Icosphere. We can change the subdivisions to 1. Then I just like to bring it out of the scene, so G and Z, and we'll just bring this down. Click back on our particle. By the way, just so that we don't get confused, we can name this to emitter, and if you want, you can also name this one volume. Let's also name our particle just so that we know where to find it. So select the icosphere and name this particle. Then one more time, click on the emitter, back down, and now we can select particle from the list. We do want to give this some size variance, so let's change the size to 0.025 and the random to 0.9. We don't see much effect with our particles, so let's select our particle object. Head over to the materials properties, click new. Then you want to select the base color and set this to something blue. But we also want to bring up the value, so select the value and type in 5. Scroll down a bit, let's add metallic and bring the roughness all the way down as well. Something is still causing an issue, so I'm glad this happened, because you may run into this and be scratching your head as to figure out what to do. So you can see that our particles are still not having any effect, and the reason why is because I told you to switch this to wireframe. So let's just head back over to the object properties, and instead of having this display as wire, let's display this as textured. Now of course our cube is in the way, so the final thing we need to do is go back to the particle settings, then head down to the render and uncheck show emitter. Also we want to open up the viewport display and uncheck show emitter as well. And now you can see that our particles are shining. Since we're done with our particle, let's just select this, and we want to turn this off in the viewport and the render, but leave it on for the real time. So now that we're done that, if we just turn off our overlays, you can see that we're getting a lot closer to our final result. Let's click on our hand here, and I'm just going to rename this to clock hand just so I know where it is in the collections. Head back to frame 1 and you hit play. It doesn't really move, so we just want to quickly attach this. So select the hand, shift select the gear, and control P and select object. Now if we hit play, this sticks with our gear. I'm just going to turn off the shading just so that we can see a little bit better. Then again, just make sure that you've got that selected. Head over to the particle properties and let's add a new particle system. I'm going to set mine to around 10,000, but if you got a slower system, you can go a little bit less than that if you need. In this case, we want to have these start and end with our animation, so I'm going to set that to 250. Set our lifetime to about 300 and the random to 0.5. Again, I'm going to click here and emit this from the volume and set this to random. This doesn't matter as much, but it's just what I had for mine. Much like the other system, we're going to turn off the velocity, turn on rotation, give it a random amount. Then we'll add 25 for the brownian and 0.5 for damping. Change this to object and we'll select our particle. We can leave the emitter on since we're using that as our clock hand. And the very final thing is to set the gravity to 0. One thing I forgot to do is just change the size. So let's go to the scale, type in 0.015, and for the randomness we'll type in 0.9 again. Make sure to save your animation, and now if we hit play you can see that we've got our particles. Turn back on the render preview and things are looking really good. So just a couple things left to do. Let's just zoom out a bit. I'm going to add a background using a cube, so Shift A, cube. Then let's just scale this quite large, just so that it covers our entire simulation. Something like that. Then materials, new, set the value all the way to 0, specular down, and roughness up. Let's just get in a little bit closer to our simulation. Shift A and let's add a camera. Hold Control, Alt, and type in 0 on your numpad. Hit F3, type in walk, Then use your arrow keys Q and E and your mouse to set your view. Then once you're happy, let's head over to the camera settings, add some depth of field. Then in this case, we can just select our text as our focus object and set the f-stop to something really low like 0.2. And now if we just turn off our overlays, we've got this really nice background. I set my f-stop to about 0.1, but just keep in mind that this will take a little bit longer to render. So one more time, I'm going to turn our overlays back on, just zoom out a bit. Then since everything is named, I'm just going to click on our emitter, head into the cache settings and click bake. Then I'm going to click on the clock hand as well and hit bake. Head over to the rendering tab. I added motion blur to mine, and then again you can just pick a frame, render, and render image. You'll notice that there's a little bit of blobbiness happening here, so if you are using motion blur for EEVEE, you just want to change the steps to at least something like 3 or 4. It will up your render time, but it'll make it look a lot nicer. Awesome, so I hope you enjoyed the first tutorial of 2021. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please like and subscribe. And if you're able to support me even further, make sure to head over to my Patreon page to become a member, and you'll get access to this file as well as a bunch of the other files on my channel. Okay, I'll see you soon.